Welcome to Seasoned Liberally. My name is Cecil. Today, we are going to be making a couple of traditional salads, but we're going to hold the mayo. Normally, these salads would use mayonnaise as a base, but instead, we're going to do a little tweaks to them, and we're also going to make them a little brighter by using a vinaigrette. So I hope you stick around. So to get started today, we're going to be making a couple of very traditional salads. One that's coleslaw, that's a very traditional salad, sometimes made with buttermilk, other times made with mayonnaise, very often made with mayonnaise, and tuna salad, which again, also very often use mayonnaise in that recipe. We're going to skip the mayonnaise today, and we're going to actually be using vinaigrettes for both. The vinaigrettes will be very different. We're going to start with the tuna. The tuna is going to be an Asian-inspired tuna, so it's going to be using a lot of flavors that are very common in Asian dishes to try to spice up and brighten the tuna and not just have a very simple tuna salad. Normal tuna salad has a little bit of onion in it, some diced celery. People throw in a couple of other little additives, and then they'll dump a bunch of mayonnaise on top of the tuna, stir it around, throw it on some bread or toast or crackers, however they want to eat it. And that's a perfectly serviceable dish, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't do that if that's what you like. So mayonnaise is very, very creamy, and it's got a very creamy flavor to it. And so it's going to add a different type of flavor than if you were going to use a vinaigrette. A vinaigrette uses less oil and more vinegar, and that gives it that brightness. And so that's what we're going to do today, is we're going to make a vinaigrette for this tuna salad. Now, the tuna salad is going to be Asian-inspired. So earlier I took and sliced thin one shallot, and you can see that I sliced it nice and thin here, as thin as I could get it. You could also dice it if you like, but I like to have nice little pieces on there on the fork. I took and sliced some red pepper too, and so I had a nice red pepper, and I sliced it into little tiny slices, little julienne pieces. And then I also took a couple sticks of celery. That was one pepper, and then two sticks of celery, and I cut them on a bias. So instead of cutting it straight across or dicing it, I cut it on a bias. And then I added to that a couple of tablespoons of minced parsley. And so that's my vegetables for this dish. Now, one thing I want to mention too is when you are making a salad, one thing you want to pay attention to is what's going to be on the fork. If you're giving your guests a knife and a fork, that's perfectly fine to give them a larger chunk of whatever it is you're giving them. A perfect example of this is a wedge salad. You've gotten a wedge salad at a restaurant, I'm sure, before. It comes with a giant honking quarter piece of an iceberg lettuce covered in things. And then you use your knife to cut it. But you would never want a giant piece of anything in a salad. So what we do is we make sure that we cut each piece so that we would recognize that it could be put on a fork and then put into someone's mouth. You don't want to have to, especially if they don't have the utensils for it, you certainly don't want to make the salad difficult to eat. So we have these vegetables ready. The next thing we did was we made a vinaigrette. So the first thing I did was I took some ginger. I took the outside rind off the ginger by using a blunt edge of a spoon. That's a real easy way to remove the piece of peel on the outside of the ginger. And then I grated it. I find that grating it winds up cutting the fibers better than if I were to dice it and then rock my knife. I then added 1 clove of garlic. Now you can add certainly as many cloves of garlic as you like, but garlic does have a little heat to it, and raw garlic especially. So I wouldn't add too much. It might overpower all the other flavors that are in this dish. I added the juice of 1 lime to this. Then I added some soy sauce, a little bit of tahini, and I wound up adding 1/4 cup of rice wine vinegar. Now, the ratio for every vinaigrette is 3-to-1. That's going to be your average vinaigrette. Sometimes you change that ratio based on what you're cooking. If you're making a salad lyonnaise, for instance, the salad lyonnaise has on it a poached egg with a runny yolk. You normally break that yolk, and that will flow into the salad below. It's a very classic French salad. You want to make sure that your vinaigrette is more bright, has more acid content in it when you're making a salad lyonnaise, because that richness from that yolk is going to seep down into that salad, and it's going to make it it's going to make your vinaigrette taste too oily if you don't make it a little brighter initially. In this case, we're doing a very classic vinaigrette, and the classic vinaigrette is 3-to-1. So I'm using 1/4 cup of rice wine vinegar, and I'm adding to that 3/4 cup of extra virgin olive oil. What I want is a nice flavorful oil, so I added olive oil to this. You could add a neutral oil if you like, but I find that olive oil is a wonderful vinaigrette oil. Now, you slowly add in your oil. Once all of your acids are in the bottom of the bowl and all your additives, I start whisking. Then I'm going to add my oil in a nice, slow, steady stream. As time goes on, it will thicken. As it thickens, you could add the oil a little faster. At the very end of this, I also whisk in a little bit of sesame oil. I want to add a little more sesame flavor than just the tahini that I added to this. So I'm adding the sesame oil at the very end. Now your vinaigrette, when it's finished, should be homogeneous, like so. It should not separate. And as you can see, it's thick and it covers this spoon. And so that is a consistency of a vinaigrette that we like. So that's what this is that Asian vinaigrette. I'm going to give it a taste to see how it tastes. I added soy sauce to this. I might add a little more if it needs a little more salt. I might add a little soy sauce at the very end here, but I think this is a good flavor for right now. So, tuna can come packed in water or oil. I am using tuna packed in oil today, but you can certainly use tuna packed in water. Now, you can reserve this oil. This is extra virgin olive oil inside of this tuna, and it would make a wonderful vinaigrette. But I'm making a lot of vinaigrette here, and I want to make sure that when I make this vinaigrette and I use the oil, and I put it in my fridge, I don't have a tuna flavor to it. If you're only going to be making this tuna salad, though, certainly use the oil that's in here and add that, and then you can just use that on your tuna salad. But if you're making an excess of vinaigrette, you don't want to have just tuna-flavored Asian vinaigrette in your fridge. So certainly you can reserve this oil if you like. I am going to dump it today. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to try to rehydrate some of this tuna. So I'm going to take a bowl, small bowl, and I'm going to put it into this bowl. And this is actually a really, really good tuna. I like this brand quite a bit. What we're going to do is we're going to crush this up and we're going to flake it. Just going to smash it a little bit. I don't want it to be tiny, tiny little slivers. So I want to have some chunks of tuna in the salad at the end. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of this vinaigrette to my tuna and just toss it. And then I'm going to let this sit for about 5 minutes and it'll soak up. When we come back, you're going to see it's going to soak this up quite a bit. So it's been about 5 minutes and you could see how much of this dressing it absorbs. There was like a sheen of it, and actually it felt like there was too much dressing in here when I put it in 5 minutes ago, and now you can see that it is completely absorbed inside of here. So what we're going to do is we're going to add this to our bowl of vegetables. And we're gonna also dress the salad itself. Now, one thing I like to add to this, and you don't have to if you don't want to, but I do like a little bit of a different crunch, right? So we got a lot of crunchy vegetables in here, but I do like a different crunch, like a meatier crunch. And so I add a little bit of salted pecans, and you can either cut these, or you could do what I do, which is just crush them with your hands. This is about, I would say this is about 1/3 cup worth of pecans. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to crush these with my hands and then put them inside. Now what this is going to do is add a different type of crunch, like I said. So when you bite into it, there's not just that snap, but there's also like a really hearty crunch as well. So to this, I'm going to add a touch of dressing. I don't want it swimming. Normally, tuna salad is absolutely drenched in mayonnaise. And so in this case, we want it to be still taste bright and still taste a little light. So we're gonna add just a bit of dressing to the outside here, and then I'm gonna toss it. And so I added, you know, that's maybe about a 1/4 cup of dressing. We're gonna see what it looks like. And we're just stirring it up here. That's about right for me. This is great on naan. If you saute up like a naan, get it nice and pliable, maybe even a little caramelized. Put this on it as an open-faced sandwich. That's wonderful. You can have it on crackers. It's really a wonderful dish, but I'm gonna actually just put it on a piece of toast, as if I were making a little sandwich. There we go. So let me give it a shot. All those flavors really come out. It's got a great medley of vegetables, which have a nice crunch, and also they add their own different properties, right? So it has a celery flavor, it has a green pepper, like a red pepper flavor to it. That vinaigrette is wonderful. Very bright, and also has all those really great undertones of ginger and garlic. There's that umami flavor from the soy sauce. And us just letting that tuna sit inside of that dressing just for a minute or two really changed the flavor profile of that tuna. That tuna is really, really very, very, it's got a wonderful meaty flavor to it, and it feels like, it doesn't feel like it's canned tuna. It feels like it's been cooked, but it definitely doesn't feel like it's been canned, because that normally has that very dry flavor to it. It's gone in this preparation. So in order to do this coleslaw recipe, normally coleslaw is made with mayonnaise and sugar. The sugar, when you add it to a coleslaw recipe, normally breaks the cell walls down of your cabbage, and it will then exude moisture. Normally this is done while the dish is actually sitting, so it will sometimes, I don't know if you've ever had this happen, where you go up and you try to get some coleslaw and there's a big soupy mess inside of the bowl. That's water from inside of the cabbage that's been leaking out because the sugar has essentially weakened the cell walls of the cabbage. So what we did is we're gonna actually try to avoid all that moisture in our vinaigrette version of this coleslaw. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our cabbage, and what I did earlier was I wound up coring my cabbage. First I cut it in half, then I cored it by cutting a V and cutting out that piece, that hard core. Then I cut it in half again, and then I took that and ran it over a mandolin. Now you can, of course, shred your cabbage however you see fit. If you want to use a grater, if you want to use your food processor, that's perfectly fine. You can also, if you want, just use your knife. I've done that many times. Just try to make sure that you're shaving it, that you're not cutting it into big chunks. Again, we are making sure that this final dish does not have giant pieces in it that you can't spear with a fork. I did that to both purple and to white cabbage. Then I took and I wound up julienning on that same mandolin some carrots. But you can, again, use a food processor, use your grater at home, or like I did, use a mandolin. Once I had all those pieces, I salted them. Now I put enough salt on there so I would essentially season it. And what this is going to do is it's going to break the cell wall down, because sugar and salt are very similar. They're hygroscopic. They're going to pull that water out of whatever you put them on, specifically if it's vegetables or if it happens to be a protein of some kind, it will pull the water out of it. And in this case, it's going to be pulling the water out of all three of the vegetables in here, the root vegetable, which is the carrots, and the two types of cabbage. So I put that on there, tossed it, and then I put it on a colander just so I could show you how much water it takes out. So now I have this, it's sat for 2 hours. It's got to sit for a while. I normally let it sit on my counter, or you can just let this colander sit right over your sink and let it drain. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to spin it in a salad spinner to show you how much more water is in here. You can squeeze it with your hands. You could lay some paper towel down and tap it if you want to get it more dry. I'm going to use a salad spinner because I really just want to show you how much water is released in here. our salad is now relatively dry. And what came out of it, out of this cabbage, is this much water. And so that's out of the cabbage and out of the other, out of the carrot. And so what we're going to do is we're going to dump this water, and we're going to now have a much more, you're going to find that the cabbage itself, as it's been sitting, the cell walls have been broken down, so now it's a lot more pliable and it's a lot more palatable. Normally cabbage is a very hearty vegetable, so when you cut into it and you try to eat it raw in a salad, it will be very hearty, and sometimes it's very tough. You're going to find that once you set this out on the counter for 2 hours and let that salt make its way through there, it's going to wind up tenderizing it, and it's going to have a really nice mouthfeel. That's actually what happens in regular coleslaw with that sugar. It winds up sitting in that for a while, and it will wind up softening it as well. So let me wipe this out, and we'll get started on our coleslaw. So we have 1/2 of a head of cabbage, each red and white. And then we have about 3 carrots that have been julienned inside of here. Now to this, we're gonna add some more vegetables. I'm gonna add some red onion to this. You can add any kind of onion. You could add shallot if you like to this. You could also add shallot to the dressing, like you would add shallot to a dressing. If you add shallot to a dressing, shallot winds up being an emulsifier in that dressing. So just like a mustard or a mayo, if you were to put that in a dressing, shallot has an enzyme in it that makes it an emulsifier. So it's wonderful to put in dressing. So if you dice it up really fine and put that in your dressing, it will help keep that emulsion for your vinaigrette. I'm not going to be using shallot today. I'm going to be using a different emulsifier for this. I'm going to be using mustard in this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make some nice, very small, sliced thin pieces of red onion in this. And really the goal here is just to keep this vibrancy that we have going on inside of this dish already. It's already a very vibrant looking dish, and so we don't want to add things that are going to mute that color. I'm going to actually add my onion here in matchsticks so that color keeps popping and it doesn't detract or mute the color. I'm gonna add another little bit here. This is gonna be about maybe 1/3 of an onion, a little more than a quarter, but certainly not a whole half of onion in here. A little bit of raw onion flavor in there adds a nice flavor layer to this. So now we're gonna add some jalapenos. Now jalapenos, when they're seeded and the pith is out, are not very hot. They almost taste like green peppers. But just a little bit of heat to this really does add quite a bit of flavor, and it's contrasting flavor with the rest of it. And you're going to find out later, because I'm going to add a little sweet to this. It's going to make it that sweet and hot is a very, very popular flavor combination all over the world. And you can also, if you want it hot, if you want it spicy, you can leave these completely whole, keep the seeds and the pith in. So now to this, I'm also going to add a little bit of cilantro. I want to throw in some cilantro on top. Fresh herbs give it a wonderful flavor. We added parsley to our tuna salad earlier, and we want to add some sort of garden flavor and some sort of fresh flavor. That's why I use herbs all the time, fresh herbs. And cilantro is the perfect mix here. It adds a nice fresh flavor. If you don't like cilantro, you can certainly add a little bit of parsley to this. That would work just fine. But I want to add a nice layer of freshness to this with the cilantro. And cilantro and jalapeno go really well together. It's a really a wonderful combination. I'm also adding a little bit of oregano to this. Now this is going to add just a touch of bitterness. Oregano leaves have they're really fragrant, and they also are just a touch bitter. And we want to add a little bit of bitterness to this. Normally, we're going to balance this bitterness out later with a little bit of sweetness, but we want to make sure that the dish is balanced. And so when we add sweetness to it, we want to add a little bit of bitterness to it too. And fresh oregano does add just a touch of bitterness to this. And so does the cilantro too. The cilantro also is a little touch bitter too. I would not add dried oregano to this. I like fresh herbs in this. You can skip the oregano, it's perfectly fine, but I think it adds a nice layer. So that's, it's maybe 1.5 tablespoons, 2 tablespoons worth of diced, minced oregano. So this is our coleslaw. And what we're going to do is it's going to have a nice green pop to it. It's going to have a nice purple pop to it. But what we're going to do is now we're going to make the vinaigrette. So for this vinaigrette, we're going to start out with mustard. There's a couple of different kinds of mustard you can use. There's plenty of different kinds of mustard out there. I like Dijon for this, and there's a couple different kinds. You can use the stone ground or you can use the regular Dijon. I'm actually going to use the regular Dijon mustard today for this. The mustard itself is an emulsifier. It's going to help keep this vinaigrette together. So to this dish, I'm going to add, to this bowl, I'm going to add a couple tablespoons worth of mustard. So to the mustard, I'm going to add 1/3 of a cup of this Prosecco wine vinegar. Now this is a little sweeter vinegar. We're going to add this directly in. Now the ratio again is 3 to 1. So 3 parts oil to 1 part vinegar. And so this is my 1/3 of a cup. I'll be adding a full cup of olive oil to this. So to this, I'm going to add my salt and pepper to try to get them to, specifically the salt, to try to get it so it's actually dissolved. So I'm adding enough salt, what I think is probably going to be enough salt for all the oil too. And I am adding some pepper to this. Now, I am going to add this oil in a little stream to start out. And we're going to keep whisking it until it starts to emulsify. Now that mustard is going to really help it emulsify. So it's starting to thicken, so I can add my oil a little faster now. You can see it's thickening up quite a bit here. And there we go, there's our beautiful vinaigrette. Now we're going to taste it for flavor here real quick. And it is going to get a little thicker than this. This is a perfect vinaigrette right now. Like this is absolutely perfect, exactly the consistency you want on a vinaigrette. It's very good. It's very bright. What we're going to add to that though, because if you can certainly just use this as straight as a vinaigrette and make this dish and it will be nice and bright. But we did add a little bit of bitterness to this. So we want to balance that flavor out just a touch. So to this, we're actually going to add a little bit of this fig jam. And so fig, especially with coleslaw, especially if you're going to serve coleslaw with some kind of pork, figs and pork, plums and pork, apples and pork and fruit normally go really well together. And in this case, we're going to add a couple of tablespoons of this fig jam because it's going to add a layer of sweetness to this. And then once it mixes with that bitter, it's going to basically just mellow everything out. It might have a tiny hint of sweetness, but that'll taste really good when we make it with pork, and it'll be a really wonderful final layer to this. So a couple of tablespoons in here, and now I'm just going to whisk it again. Now I didn't add this earlier because jam is a really thick substance, right? So jam has a really deep thickness to it. It's very stiff and thick. Especially this jam itself. Some jams are a little less thick than this, but this jam itself is very thick. And I didn't add this earlier because what I didn't want to do was make my emulsion with this jam because I would then think it would be a little too stiff for all the oil I put in. So I wanted to see what the actual emulsion looked like before I added my jam in. You could add your jam earlier if you want, if that's your jam. So now we are going to coat all of these vegetables, and we're going to do it carefully. What we don't want to do is have it swimming like Grandma's coleslaw. We want to make sure that it is coated at the right amount. So we're going to coat this ourselves, and we're going to toss it as we go, and we're not going to add all this dressing to it. We're going to add, maybe 1/3 of this dressing to start out, and we're going to toss and see where this gets us. We're going to add a little more. We want it to be a little wetter than that because traditional coleslaw is a little more dressed than a regular salad would be. There's only a few ingredients in here, but there's a lot going on, and it is really, really a great balance of flavors. Little tiny bit of heat, little tiny bit of sweet, and then because of the fig jam and because of that jalapeno that we put in here. And then there's a really wonderful bright flavor to it that you normally don't get in coleslaw. Normally coleslaw doesn't have that acidity flavor to it. It's got a creamy flavor to it. This has a bright flavor to it. Really would go well with a lot of different other dishes as a side dish. Certainly would go well with a fried chicken. It would be a wonderful pair if you smoked a brisket, or if you wound up cooking a pork shoulder for a long time. This would be a perfect pair for that. It's got a great undertone of flavors. You don't have that sort of, there's like a sulfuric flavor to a raw cabbage that is completely gone from this, because all of that sort of, while it sat out, it just dissipated. So that flavor is not in here. It does have a little edge of bitterness to it, but it's not a bitter flavor, but there is a bitter edge to it that also, again, mutes that sweet flavor that we have. Really a wonderful, wonderful pairing. This dish, I think, will probably surpass Mom's coleslaw recipe if you make it. So that's gonna be it for today. I hope you try these two salads, the tuna salad, the Asian-inspired tuna salad, and this vinaigrette coleslaw, mustard vinaigrette coleslaw. Hold the mayo sometimes. Sometimes it's okay to switch and change up some very traditional recipes into your own or into something else. Please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. I know we're still trying to grow this channel, so it's very helpful if you come here and you see the video and you like the content, just hit the little bell so you get notified. These come up, I don't have a regular production schedule for these because I have I'm also very busy with other projects. So I'm still trying to build this channel. I hope you subscribe, I hope you share with your friends, and I hope you try these recipes. And if you do, let me know in the comments below.